When I turned 50, I started looking back at what my behaviour was leaving as a legacy for the planet. And I just didn't like what I saw at all.
We're all sick because of the way we eat and because of the way we farm.
I was inducted into, if you like, the industrial farming paradigm. And it was only after the 1982 drought that I realised there had to be a better way and to avoid debt and harming the landscape. And so I began to study alternate methods, which led me to regenerative agriculture.
People often ask me what changed when we changed the way we run the place. No, I think it's just one word, and it's just mindset. We changed from being stock managers to being land managers.
Regenerative agriculture covers a variety of practices, from ecological grazing to agroforestry to using biological inputs in cropping, things like permaculture, biodynamics. It's a wide range, but they're all around regenerating how the landscape works. We humans can actually allow nature to improve herself if we enable her. Through improving your landscape health, you improve the resilience, you ride out the droughts, and it's ending up being a lot more profitable. The latest research is showing it's much better for human health, mental and physical.
Lots of the products we're applying to the landscape on an annual basis have a negative effect on life. Now, what the world needs for the future, what human beings and all life need humans to be doing, is to have an agricultural system that the consequence of management is to increase diversity, not diminish it. And without that, we're in a real dilemma.
Out of my own farming journey, having made all the mistakes and then realised there were some wonderful solutions where I could do it easier without debt and regenerate landscapes, I was always passionate about nature. I ended up going back in my late 50s to university and doing a PhD looking at all this and why farmers had changed. And out of that came my book, Call of the Reed Warbler. The book's really about these wonderful farmers, David Marsh, for example, who's one of the leaders in regenerative grazing, holistic grazing in Australia.
Sometimes there are quite big differences between how conventionally managed farms look compared to those that are being managed holistically. What we see with regenerative grazing practices, you graze the plants for a very short period of time, and you've got to have a fencing system that allows you to move the animals around so that you've got enough recovery time for your paddocks to recover. Whereas when you've got stock in every paddock and you've got to graze down really short, the plant roots are very small. Those little insignificant falls of rain that are very important for a regenerative system. In the conventional system, they seem to do nothing because any growth that happens is being grazed immediately. So we're allowing plants to get big, which makes the root systems invade a bigger area of soil and puts a lot of organic matter into the soil, which helps it hold water. If you've got plants that are useful for grazing, they evolved here, they're re-establishing here, there's a diversity of them, they'll take advantage of rainfall at any time of the year. That's incredibly valuable, and we haven't spent any money putting them here.
Some people get confused when we talk about the new ecological grazing. It was actually developed by an ecologist, a guy called Alan Savory in, as it was then, Rhodesia, watching those giant animal herds in the millions migrating. And you'd think that such huge numbers, disturbing and eating, would degrade a grassland. But he found the opposite. That was the healthiest grassland you'd ever find. Led by him, but others, they've now refined a management system for we farmers on commercial landscapes to replicate that ecological impact. So you make more paddocks, get as bigger mobs as you can, doing the same thing, but this time under human management.
We went through 9 years of drought from 2002 to 2010, and we didn't spend a cent on feeding. So that saved us between $500,000 and $800,000, which is a massive amount of money in a farming business. We've learned how to estimate how much grass we've got ahead of us all the time so that we're constantly adjusting our stocking rate so that we're not overstocked. that means that you don't have to spend any money feeding. So that is a massive change from the past. You know, instead of feeling anxious and out of control, debt spiralling and that sort of thing, we're not going through that.
Not far from where I live is a friend of mine, Charles Massy, and he's doing some remarkable stuff. He's got a running creek through his property which hasn't been functioning all that well because a lot of the water disappears or erodes in big storms, and he's set about using what's called natural sequence farming, and so by slowing down the water and holding it, he's now rehydrating his landscape.
We're really trying to recreate the water systems that existed prior to settlement. When I came home, it was at the end of a fairly long 4-year drought, and our creek corridor was just a dry, barren, a weed-infested corridor. One of the things we've done on the place is installed leaky weirs in a lot of the streams. And a leaky weir is basically just a structure in a stream so that when water comes down with runoff in a flood environment, it slowly leaks through and continue on downstream at a much slower rate. What we're trying to do with putting the weirs in is just to hold back more water at the top end of the place, so that when it does get dry and the stream stops flowing, there's water there just to keep slowly making its way downstream. And that's in this dry country with very sporadic rainfall, that's the way we need to keep our streams flowing. The biggest thing, I think, is probably managing the stock that are in this area. Stock are a great thing as a healer of the banks with lots of intensity, but then for every bit of intensity of stock being in there, you need a lot of rest. And that under normal grazing systems, a lot of streams don't get rest. And by taking the stock out, all the profusion of life that you can see here now just wouldn't have occurred. Giving a lot of these holes much more life, it gives chances for plants to grow. It's also handy for the stock and for birds and for platypus and for all the animals that live along the creek. Nature works wonders if humans are kept out of it for a while and animals are kept out for a little while.
Not far from here, some friends of mine, Beatrice and Tobias Koenig, who are leading biodynamic farmers in a fairly tough environment, growing healthy biodynamic soils, and that's all through getting your soil biology going, accessing all the nutrients that industrial agriculture shuts out by killing that soil biology. So it's fairly simple stuff, but it's profound.
You know, we have flavour. There are plenty of people who say that our potatoes are fantastic and our garlic is really good and Beatrice vegetables. You address the chemistry in the soil and then you address the biology. So the biology is addressed by using cover crops and compost teas, including biodynamic preparations. All the nutrients we think are needed, which does, for instance, include lime or gypsum, or we use a lot of fish, we use a lot of seaweed. That's a fairly small plant, and that root system. And every single root is surrounded by soil. And what that actually tells you is that there is soil biology happening. Well, what I mean with that is that they're not only the necessary nutrients in the soil, but there are microbes and fungi and all little critters and earthworms working in the soil, cycling stuff. If we would go into another paddock that we haven't worked anything on, you wouldn't see that. You would see a few roots and they would be pretty much bare, no soil. Agriculture is hard work, but it can be very, very rewarding if, for instance, you've got people telling you that your produce is not only tasteful, but actually nourishes you rather than just feeding you. And if you see that the place is getting better, it's just very rewarding.
It's a big question, how important is regenerative ag in addressing the biggest issues of our time? We now know in 5 continents, for example, ecological grazing is regenerating tens of millions of hectares. We now know that the very best way of pulling down excess carbon from the atmosphere is through healthy agriculture, regenerative plants, regenerative systems, burying carbon long-term in the soil. One of the questions I get asked is how are we going to feed the world without industrial agriculture, industrial inputs? People forget that 70% of the world's food comes off 5 acres and less off peasant farms. And interestingly, the majority of those farmers are women. But on the rest of it, where there was once industrial farming, regenerative farming is more than capable of filling the gap with all the added benefits. The question of change is the big one in this moment in time on Earth, as we're rapidly racing down this economic rationalist industrial paradigm, consuming more and destroying more. How do we change is the question.
There are a lot of what I'd call industrial farmers who have an ecological conscience, but they don't really make the connection between ecology and complexity and how that relates to their business. And we've found that our business has gone a heck of a lot better since we've been making decisions towards the environment. I think a lot of people are worried about feeling marginalised or ostracised. It's a courageous thing to swim against the tide.
It's not about saying I'm biodynamic and therefore I'm better. No, we have to be open to everything and actually create an environment where my neighbour is not offended by what I'm doing, but interested in what I'm doing. And it's the only chance to change the whole situation.
The thing I want to emphasise about this story, where I've really highlighted how regenerative agriculture can help save the planet and human health, is that that's only half the story. The other half is we need urban people to start connecting with the regenerative ag movement. And they can do that either by supporting farmers' markets or buying product direct. But they can also do it in their own power. Growing their own veggies is a hell of a start. It's got to be an indivisible connection between people out there in the urban areas, getting acquainted with what's going on out here, but also how it integrates with what they can do and are doing.
We've seen ourselves as outside of nature for a long time, for probably a couple of 100 years, but really we're just another species. Sometimes people think that evolution's all about competition, but there's a heck of a lot of cooperation in the change of evolution over time and adapting to circumstance.